bear with us. And in the meantime, we'd like to try to use this time to answer your questions. Go ahead and post them in the comments on Facebook or tweet them at me at apiper13. So if you are just tuning in, I am NowThis senior politics producer Alan Piper, and I am here for today's live fact check of President Trump's briefing. Here comes the President of the United States. We will attempt to check what he has to say in real time.
Thank you very much. It was just announced by Attorney General Barr that
And I hear the echo. I'm going to try to resolve that.
of Legend DeFaro, horribly shot, wonderful young man, and we have this just came out 2 minutes ago. So Attorney General Barr just announced, as you know, we Legend.
Thanks for your patience. We are all working from home, and so there are occasionally some technical glitches, but we are resolving them now.
Difficulty with crime, in particular certain types of crime. So that's really good news. They caught the killer of Legend. Today we saw Joe Biden continue to politicize a pandemic and to show his appalling lack of respect for the American people. That's what it is. At every turn, Biden has been wrong about the virus, ignoring the scientific evidence and putting left-wing politics before facts. And
Well, this seems to be the opposite of the case. He seems to be responding to the fact that Joe Biden today called for a nationwide mask mandate, and he was citing scientific evidence that suggests that this could save tens of thousands of lives. A recent study showed that if 80% of Americans wore masks, the transmission rate could be cut by roughly 92%.
this is, according to many people, I believe that Dr. Fauci agreed with that. He said that President Trump made a great decision when he put the ban on China. Joe Biden wants to fling open American borders, allowing the pandemic to infiltrate every U.S. community based on his policies. He wants to have ridiculous open borders. I've been saying from...
Okay, well, it is the case that Joe Biden wants comprehensive immigration reform. It is the case that he wants an end to separating families at the border. No Democrat is calling for open borders. This is a false claim.
The wall is getting close to 290 miles long. And
it is not true that the wall is close to 290 miles long. That is simply a false statement.
That we disagree with. But while Joe Biden would allow rioters and looters and criminals and millions of illegal aliens to roam free in our country, he wants the federal government to issue a sweeping new mandate to law-abiding citizens. He wants the President of the United States, with the mere stroke of a pen, to order over 300 million American citizens to wear a mask for a minimum of 3 straight months. I guess this just happened. He thinks it's good politics, I guess.
Well, the fact is, it's interesting because President Trump began this by suggesting that Joe Biden is ignoring science. Actually, Joe Biden was responding to health experts' predictions that it could save 40,000 lives over the next 3 months if there were a nationwide mask mandate.
To issue such a mandate, or how federal law enforcement could possibly enforce it, or why we would be stepping on governors throughout our country, many of whom have done a very good job, and they know what is needed.
It is interesting that the president suggests that it would be an offense against governors to call for a mask mandate instead of leaving it up to them. But it is also interesting to note that he has absolutely tried to overstep governors who have not been opening as fast as he would like. Let's not forget that he tweeted, "Liberate Michigan, liberate Virginia," and that he threatened to cut off federal funds to schools that did not open on his timetable.
With a lot of governors, you've already started, and Dr. Fauci and Dr. Birx. If the president has the unilateral power to order every single citizen to cover their face in nearly all instances, what other powers does he have? That's why he refused, Biden, to take questions. He couldn't answer any of them, couldn't answer the questions. He refuses to take questions. He never takes questions. I take questions. He never takes questions. And you sort of wonder what's going on because they're not that difficult.
Joe Biden does, in fact, take questions, and this president, while he often does take questions, on many occasions, he will walk out instead of answering a question. We have seen that. Most recently, we saw it this weekend when CBS Paula Reed challenged him on the false claim that he had made when he lied and said that he was responsible for the Veterans Choice Act, which President instead of answering the question, President Trump simply walked out.
We do, and we've been saying wear them when it's appropriate, especially in terms of social distancing, if you can't distance enough. And what do you have to lose? But again, it's up to the governors, and we want to have a certain freedom. We want to have a certain freedom. That's what we're about. At the same time, we also understand that each state is different and is facing unique circumstances. You have very, very different states facing very unique differences and circumstances. We've entrusted the governors of each state, elected by the people, to develop and enforce their own mask policies and other policies, following guidance from the federal government and CDC. We're working with each state to implement a plan based on the facts and science. We will continue to urge Americans to wear masks when they cannot socially distance, but we do not need to bring the full weight of the federal government down on law-abiding Americans to accomplish this goal. Americans must have their freedoms, and I trust the American people and their governors very much. I trust the American people, and the governors want to do the right thing.
The president is suggesting that Joe Biden has called for a some sort of steep penalty. It seems to be just a call to the nation that the president could do. The greatest power that the president of the United States has nothing to do with the law. He could just say, everyone please wear a mask, and people would do it, because he's the president of the United States. Unfortunately, he's been extremely reluctant to do that. He has routinely questioned the use of masks and told the Wall Street Journal that he thought the people who were wearing masks were doing it to show their dislike of him, which clearly sends a message to people who want to show their support of him that they should not be wearing masks.
Governors that have been very, very strict on keeping people in their houses, keeping people in their, wherever they may be, apartments. And frankly, I don't think the results are necessarily better than other results. But he wants to shut...
Well, actually, the science there is fairly clear. The states that were the first to shut down were among the first to be able to flatten the curve. Now, in a lot of the northeastern states, like New York, the virus got a large head start before we knew it was here, and these northeastern states quickly became an epicenter. But the states that put in place extreme lockdown measures have in fact flattened the curve, whereas the states that were last to close and first to reopen have in fact seen spikes of cases.
And we'll be back next year. I think we'll be maybe even stronger than the previous year, where we set every record in the book on employment and stock market. By the way, our stock market numbers are very close to record, and NASDAQ is actually record over the last 14 days, 14 times now. It's been record, and that's during what we hope will be the more final stages of the pandemic. So if we did what Biden wanted to do, it would shut down our healthcare system and lead to a massive increase in mortality, including suicide, overdose, heart disease, and countless other physical and mental harms.
He seems to be saying that if he asked everyone to wear masks, it would lead to countless suicides. That is not true.
Those shutdowns are very punitive, very punitive. They hurt a lot of people in a lot of different ways, through depression, through suicide, through so many other things, alcohol, drugs. Biden's approach is regressive, it's anti-scientific, and it's very defeatist, but it'll be very bad for our country. While Joe Biden has been playing politics from the sidelines, he has no clue. We've been solving problems and delivering tremendous results. The most advanced and robust testing system on the planet, the number one producer of ventilators in the world by far, unprecedented industrial mobilization, biggest since World War II, Operation Warp Speed to deliver life-saving treatments, and very soon a vaccine. What a...
Dr. Fauci has said that he sees next year as the soonest likely time to get a safe and reliable vaccine.
Every single thing he said to do, every single thing we did, and we did them well. So Biden has no idea on his own. He only knows what he thinks we should do, and he spews it out, and then I guess you could say he plagiarizes, and he really did in our case, because every single one of the events, I think, Kayla, we can say that was something we had already done. So we'll do.
This is not true. Joe Biden wrote an op-ed on January 27th warning that the president was already failing in the response to this virus. January 27th, he wrote that. In the days that followed, President Trump went golfing. He held rallies. He said that by April this goes away. When it gets warmer, it miraculously goes away. He went golfing. He rallied. Nearly 2 months passed after Joe Biden called for action before President Trump declared a state of national emergency.
Pandemic. In times of national challenge, Americans and Americans, and we are, by the way, we are working with countries from all over the world, and they're trying to learn from us. And some of the countries that you spoke most well about are having a tremendous surge right now, but it'll work out. But Americans must unite together, and they must put politics aside and have to.
The president says that we must put politics aside. It is worth noting he's been speaking for about 10 minutes now in the White House. It has gotten hard to differentiate with this president between campaign events and presidential events. In theory, the president should not be campaigning in the White House, but he has for about 10 minutes been basically giving a political speech attacking his opponent.
And the speed with which they're doing it, and also the speed with which the FDA is approving things, because by any other standard you would have been 2 or 3 years away from being at the point that we're at. By the end of this week, we will have shipped 1,846 rapid point-of-care testing devices to nursing homes, which are a very important source, as you know, for people that are not handling the plague from China very well. This week alone, we're sending 992 testing devices and 450,000 tests to more than 950 nursing homes across the country. And these tests are incredible. These are tests that are all new, very modern. And we're also getting on the tests that are not done immediately with the 5 to 15 minute timing. When they do send them to a lab, they're coming back now in 3 days. So it's a 3-day process, which is about as good as you can do. You have 1 day of delivering, 1 day of receiving, and 1 day in the lab. We're also requiring all nursing homes to test all members of their staff at least weekly. By unleashing America's scientific genius, we have delivered effective treatments. The case fatality rate for Americans over 70 has declined by about 85%. That's a fantastic number. It's declined. That's case fatality. It's declined by 85%. Europe has seen 40% more excess mortality than the United States compared to a non-pandemic year. So you hear the numbers, and those numbers are very interesting. But
so the president keeps trying to suggest that the U.S. mortality rate is better than other countries, and it is simply not true. The U.S. is in the top 10 for the worst mortality rate in the world. The president, as you saw in the infamous Axios interview, he wants to cherry pick and say that that it is only legitimate to look at deaths in proportion to overall cases. But in proportion to the overall proportion of the population, the U.S. is 10th for mortality, and we account for, despite having only about 5% of the world population, we have about a quarter of all the world's deaths.
Since the Egypt-Israel peace agreement was signed over 40 years ago. We have Ambassador to Israel, David Friedman, here. Thank you, David, for being here. We very much, you would agree that this was a big day for Israel and a big day for the world. Good. Thank you, David. You've been fantastic, too. Fantastic ambassador and representative of our country. Thank you very much. The deal that was reached today will enable Muslims to have far greater ability to visit many historic sites in Israel and to peacefully pray at the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which is very important to them, which they've wanted to have access to for many, many decades. This is a monumental step to forging ties of cooperation in the Middle East, and I think you're going to have other countries come forward. I can tell you we already do, and they want to make a deal. You're going to have peace in the Middle East. It would be fantastic. Israel is also suspending settlements in the West Bank, which is a big deal, a bold step toward achieving peace. Israel and the United Arab Emirates have also agreed to immediately expand and accelerate scientific collaboration to develop effective treatments and vaccines to defeat the China virus. They've both been hit. Virtually every country has been hit, 188 countries, and to save lives in their region.
So there are a few things that he said that are not true about the Israel deal that was announced today. I'm going to come back to that because it's a little nuanced, and I again want to point out that it is not a China virus. Viruses do not have nationalities.
Just announced a little while ago today. We will not rest as we continue to work toward a world of greater harmony and prosperity for all. I want to thank Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of Israel and Crown Prince Mohammed bin Zayed of the United Arab Emirates, two fantastic people, for their vision and their leadership, and I look forward to hosting them at the White House very soon to formally sign the agreement. We'll probably be doing it over the next, I would say, 3 weeks, and they'll be coming to Washington. So that was a tremendous day. That was a tremendous thing that happened. And it's a great sign. We have a lot of other interesting things going on with other nations also having to do with peace agreements. And a lot of big news is coming over the next few weeks. And I'm sure you'll be very impressed. And more importantly, it's a great thing for our country, a great thing for the world. So thank you very much. Please, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. President. I appreciate it. I want to ask you about school-age kids and food. One of the real problems when you shut down schools, these are kids on reduced and free lunch programs. They need these meals to make it through their day, and with districts shutting down school, what, if anything, can the federal government do to make sure that the kids still get decent meals as long as the schools are out?
Well, you know, we don't want the schools shut down. We want the schools to open, and especially very young children handle it, all children, but especially very young children handle it very well. So we want schools open. We don't want to be in that position. We want schools open. We've made payment, and we would, frankly, if the school isn't going to open, we would much rather follow the child with the payment, give the money to the child, meaning the parents of the child, and let the parents do what they have to do, including bringing the child to another school. Because we're finding that whether it's parents or children, people want to get back to school. They want to have their life back. Some people say the Democrats don't want schools open because that's where you have a lot of polling booths. And if you have a school closed, you can't very easily have polling booths at the school.
Okay, so the president is making a false and absurd claim that Democrats want to close schools to make it harder for people to vote. There's a couple things here that should be very clear. First of all, Democrats are trying to make it easier for everyone to vote. Republicans have admitted that they are trying to make it harder for people to vote. President Trump, in a Fox News interview, talked about how if there were large levels of voting, he talked about levels of voting where if it were ever allowed, you could never elect a Republican again. This is not true.
We're going to nail down all the details, embassies, overflights, commercial. Then we're going to extrapolate that to the rest of the region. How long that takes, I can't tell you, but we've prioritized peace over the sovereignty movement. But it's not off the table. It's just something that will be deferred until we give peace every single chance.
And what do you want the Palestinians to take away from this deal, since they're not really a party to it?
Well, but they are supported largely by some of the countries that we're talking to and that have already signed, you know, in the case of the one country, but others will be following. And I think the Palestinians will, without saying it necessarily yet, I think they very much want to be a part of what we're doing. And I see ultimately the Palestinians, I see peace between Israel and the Palestinians. I see that happening. I think as these very big, powerful, wealthy countries come in, I think the Palestinians will follow.
So I'm not going to try to break down all of the situation in the Middle East in a briefing fact check. I want to call attention to one very important thing. It is being touted that this deal, and the president has said it here in the briefing, that this would bring an end to Israel's plan to annex occupied parts of the West Bank. The Israeli Prime Minister has specifically said there is no change in his plans to annex that land. It is a postponement, but it is not a cancellation of the plan as the White House is characterizing it.
And voting by mail. So I've got two questions for you. One, are you threatening to veto any legislation that includes funding for the post office?
No, not at all, no.
So you would sign something that does include funding?
A separate thing, I would do it. But one of the reasons the post office needs that much money is to have all of these millions of ballots coming in from nowhere, and nobody knows from where and where they're going. You saw what happened in Caitlin in Virginia. It was 500,000 applications coming in, going all over the state. Nobody even knows where they came from. You saw what happened in New York, which was a disaster with Congresswoman Carolyn Maloney It was a basic disaster, and you see Paterson, New Jersey, what's going on there, and we can give you many other locations and sites. What has happened is that's part of a big negotiation. That's actually small part of a big negotiation to get more money to people that it wasn't their fault, it was China's fault. And post office is part of it. Another part of it is they want $3.5 billion just for the ballots themselves. Why it's so much, I don't know, but that's what the Democrats want. But if the bill isn't going to get done, that would mean the post office isn't going to get funded. And that would also mean that the $3.5 billion isn't going to be taken care of. So I don't know how you could possibly use these ballots, these mail-in ballots. Absentee ballots, by the way, are fine. But
absentee ballots are mail-in ballots. The president is trying to create a distinction without a difference.
we're against.
But isn't that precisely the problem, is that you're saying you do not want to give this post office funding in this coronavirus legislation. They say they need it so they can be prepared. So if the pandemic is still going on in November when the election happens and people don't feel safe to go vote in person, they can vote by mail, and it can be safe and it can be secure.
I can understand the post office, and if we could agree to a bill, the overall bill, which is obviously a much bigger number than just the post office, that would be fine. But they have the post office as one of their requests. It's their request.
Right, but this morning you said you were against it, didn't you?
I'm only against, what I'm against is I'm against doing anything where the people aren't taken care of, and the people aren't being taken care of properly.
Well, the president has said that he wants to, he has previously said that he would veto spending bills that have money for the Postal Service. And he said this morning that the reason he doesn't want the Postal Service to have the money is to stop, is to make it harder for mail-in ballots to be sent.
Anything else, Caitlin, and you know this, is bailout money for the states and for the cities that are in trouble, which for the most part, are Democrat-run states and cities. So New York has a problem, California has a problem, Illinois has a tremendous problem, and others. They want to be able to bail out these states, and we don't want to be doing that, or certainly don't want to do it to the extent they're looking for $1 trillion. We don't want to be doing that.
This claim that blue states want to be bailed out, I'm going to come back to that at the end because that is a really misleading and honestly pretty gross suggestion.
Instances where this has happened, it's turned out to be fraudulent. Well, if you look at New York, it was fraudulent. If you look at Paterson, New Jersey.
There was no evidence of fraudulent voting in New York. There was a problem with postmarks in New York, which I can come back and explain, but there was no evidence of any fraudulent voting in New York. There is no evidence that voting by mail increases the likelihood of fraud, and there is no evidence that there is any significant problem of voter fraud in the U.S. It is almost non-existent.
We have to have an honest election. And if it's not going to be an honest election, I guess people have to sit down and think really long and hard about it. But if the post office, if they're not going to approve a bill, and the post office therefore won't have the money, and if they're not going to approve a big bill, a bigger bill, and they're not going to have the $3.5 billion for the universal mail-in votes, how can you have those votes? What would mean is the people will have to go to the polls and vote, like the old days, like 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 4 years ago. They have to go to the, it doesn't say anybody's taking the vote away, but it means that the universal mail-ins don't work. Absentees do work. It's a very different thing. An absentee where you make an application and you send it in, they send you a vote, it's different.
No, that actually is the same thing. You get a ballot, you fill it out, you mail it in. There is signature verification. Each state makes its own rules as to how they do that, so there are variations in the process. But no, absentee voting and mail-in voting are two different names for the same activity.
Well, if we had voting ID, and some states have that and some states don't because they can't get it passed. Most states want it. But we want people to vote. But we want people to vote, so when they vote, it means one vote. It doesn't mean ballots all over the place. You saw what was happening in Virginia, where piles of ballot applications are dropped all over the state. They had them named after dogs. They had them named after dead people. We want to have an accurate vote. I'm not doing this for any reason. Maybe the other turns out to be my advantage. I don't know. I can't tell you that. But I do know this. I just want an accurate vote. And it's a fair question, by the way. So does everybody else. Okay.
Yeah, in the back.
Mr. President, how does the accord today between Israel and the UAE help struggling and persecuted Christians in the Middle East?
Help what?
How does it help?
So President Trump is saying that he doesn't have an election reason for wanting to make it harder to vote. I just want to quote from his interview with Fox News from March 30th, where he was complaining about Democratic efforts to adequately fund resources for voting. He said, I mean, they have the majority in the House, and therefore you need their vote, and they want to get certain things. I will tell you this. If you look at before and after, and the things they had there were crazy. They had things, levels of voting, that if you ever agreed to it, you'd never have a Republican elected in this country again. The president admitted on March 30th, and again today on Fox News, that the reason, the objection that he has to widespread voting is related to the results that he anticipates from the election.
Strongly to represent us, I think they will, very well with respect to Christianity. Because in the Middle East, it's not treated well. It's not treated well at all. It's treated horribly and very unfairly. And it's criminal what's happened, and that's for many, many years. I think it's a great question and it's a very unfair situation. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. President. Larry Kudlow said that there's a routine check-in call with China on the Phase 1 trade deal. My question is, what if they bring up TikTok and also WeChat? Would you instruct your team to engage them on that executive
We have
order
a deadline of September 15th. And whether it's Microsoft, I understand, and others are negotiating. We also said that obviously it's worthless if we don't allow them into the country. So we said that the United States Treasury is going to be getting something out of this deal, something very substantial. But what we want is total security. But we have a deadline of September 15th. So I know Microsoft and others are very interested in it. But that's our deadline. And it has to be proven to be totally secure. We don't want to have any information going into China with what we've been through. And I have to tell you, you talked about the deal. You mentioned the Phase 1 deal. Well, the Phase 1 deal, it's a very interesting situation because you've been hearing the largest order of corn in history, the largest order of soybeans, the largest order of beef. They've done more than they've ever done. So you're going to have to figure that one out. With where I'm coming from, I could have, because they see my attitude. My attitude toward China is not friendly, but they have gone into orders that are extremely large, and our farmers are very happy. But with what they did with respect to the pandemic, the plague that came in from China, it just is a different feeling. It was an incredible deal, but I have a very different feeling. But they are giving the Midwest, our farmers, among the largest orders they've ever seen. Somebody told me today, Bob Lighthizer, said it's about 40% of what they're selling now is going to China. So maybe they're trying to make me change my mind a little bit, because you know my attitude on China, and it hasn't been very good. Well, we're not talking to them. No, we're talking to the companies. In theory, it's a company, but it's a company within China. That means China. And the deal will have to be substantially beneficial to the United States, and we need total security. Okay?
Mr. President, yes, Mr. President, can you say whether you yourself think that annexation should be off the table for Israel, and if so, have you communicated that to
Well, not off
Prime
the
Minister?
table. No, it's something they've discussed, but Israel has agreed not to do that. I mean, more than just off the table. They've agreed not to do it. And I think...
So again, Israel did not agree not to do it. In fact, the Prime Minister was very explicit today in saying that the plans had not changed.
Pretty clear today at his own press conference that he considers this to be a temporary suspension and that the deal would still be open to him at some point in the future. I'm asking what you think he should do. Should he
Well,
actually
right now,
write it
all I
off?
can say, it's off the table. So I can't talk about sometime into the future. That's a big statement. But right now, it's off the table. Is that a correct statement, Mr. Ambassador?
Yes, the word suspend was chosen carefully by all the parties. Suspend, by definition, look it up, that means temporary halt. It's off the table now, but it's not off the table permanently.
Go ahead.
All right, so just to be clear, President Trump is saying that the annexation plan is off the table. This was the statement from Prime Minister Netanyahu today. He said, quote, "There is no change to my plan to extend sovereignty, our sovereignty, in Judea and Samaria in full coordination with the United States." And there, of course, Netanyahu was using the biblical terms for the occupied territory in the West Bank. But he was explicit that the plan would move forward.
To be Democrats who have not done a good job for many, many years. And those are states that owe a lot of money and need a lot of money, and they're talking about $1 trillion. So the post office and the $3.5 billion for the votes themselves, which sounds like a lot of money they're looking for. $3.5 billion. Think of that, $3.5 billion to have mail-in ballots. Again, absentee good, universal mail-in very bad.
Absentee voting is done by mail. There is the difference is there isn't a difference. The president is manufacturing a difference.
Well, they can do it very easily. All they have to do is make a deal. If they make a deal, the Postal Service is taken care of. The money they need for the mail-in ballots would be taken care of if we agree to it. That doesn't mean we're going to agree to it. But all they have to do is make a deal. But again, more important to them is not that. That's a lot of money, but it's small time compared to the other. What they want to do, and very, very, very strongly what they want to do, is bail out cities that are run by Democrats and have been for many years. And these cities and states have done very badly, and they desperately need money for that. And we're open to something, but we're not open to the kind of money that they need. Go ahead, please.
All right, I'm going to come back to this false notion of a blue state bailout at the end.
Make sure there is a free and fair election.
That the what?
What are you doing as president to make sure there is a free and fair election?
So everyone talks about Russia, Russia, Russia. They talk about China, China. They talk about all of these different countries that come in and run our elections, which is false. But what they don't talk about are...
Well, it is not false to say that Russia interfered in our election. It was the conclusion of 17 intelligence agencies and the Republican-controlled House, the Republican-controlled Senate Intelligence Committee that Russia did, in fact, interfere in the 2016 presidential election with the purpose of helping elect Donald Trump. And the Office of the DNI has reported that Russia is continuing in this election to try to advance the re-election of Donald Trump.
Russia or North Korea or Iran. I hear Iran too, that was part of the report. This would be very easy for them. This is much easier than, well, we have been very strong. Now, if you remember, President Obama was informed about Russia by the FBI in September. The election was in November. President Obama decided to do absolutely nothing about it. People don't mention that very much anymore. That's a lost fact. But he was informed very powerfully that they're going to do, and President Obama did nothing. We have done a lot, and we've really shored it up. But what people can never prepare for are millions and millions of mail-in ballots, because they can be forged, they can be captured, they can be taken. No, well, that's a very hard thing to do. We have to make sure that we can do that. Please.
Mr. President, after 3.5 years, do you regret it all the lying you've done to the American people? On
All the what?
everything. All the lying, all the dishonesties.
That who has done?
You have done. Tens of
Yeah,
thousands.
go ahead, please. Please. Go ahead. Go ahead.
I wanted to ask about the payroll tax
Go ahead.
cut. One, is it going to be optional or mandatory for employers to defer and not collect the payroll tax?
So we're-
I want to say that that reporter was dead on in calling attention to the fact that this president repeatedly, consistently does not tell the truth. That is the reason that we do these fact checks of him. The Washington Post had documented that by mid-July, he had made more than 20,000 false or misleading statements as president. We simply have never seen anything like this from any other political figure.
FICA, will that be are they going to be required not to collect that money?
You mean later on? You mean later on at a later
Right now,
date?
so September 1, when I get my paycheck, will
The
it be up to
the employers will collect it and give it, most likely. The employers will collect it and give it. Okay? Please go ahead.
Follow
Mr.
up on
President,
that?
I have 2 questions. The first one on domestic politics. There are claims
Can't understand a
There
word
are
you're
claims
saying.
circulating in social media that Kamala Harris is not eligible to run for vice president because she was an anchor baby, I quote. Do you or can you definitively say whether or not Kamala Harris is eligible, meets the legal requirements to run as vice president?
So I just heard that. I heard it today that she doesn't meet the requirements. And by the way, the lawyer that wrote that piece is a very highly qualified.
Okay, this is more false conspiracy theory mongering that the president is doing. It is important to remember that he launched himself into the political sphere by spreading the racist birther conspiracy theory about President Obama. Kamala Harris is a U.S. citizen born in the U.S. There is no question about her eligibility to be vice president or president of the United States.
UNGA Ambassador Kelly Craft recently said that you, or she's hoping that you might be able to deliver the speech in front of the UN General Assembly in person, even though other leaders will be sending in their video recordings. Can you confirm that?
Yeah, I'm thinking about going directly to the UN to do the speech. A lot of people will not, because of COVID, will not be able to be there, as you know. But I'm thinking,
Well, world leaders from other nations are ill-advised to travel to the United States because the U.S. has more coronavirus cases than any other country in the world, with over 5.2 million cases. That is more than a fifth of all the world's cases, even though we have only 5% of the world's population.
I think it better represents the country. Also, I feel sort of
more than a quarter of all the world's cases.
United States to be at the United Nations to deliver what will be an important speech.
So if the room is empty?
Well, the room won't be empty. The room will have different people there and representatives of countries. But I can understand how it's very difficult for countries to be there. They won't be there only for that reason. They'd love to be there. I've already had people call, in fact, say, a couple of them, I'd love to be there. If you want, I'll be there. I said, don't be there. You don't have to be there. No, the room would be, I think the room will not be, although there may be a spacing requirement like you have in this room. This room was always packed. This room would be packed again if we had the seats open, but you have a spacing requirement, so I understand that the United Nations, they may have that too. Yes, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have a question on the peace deal, but if you don't mind, could I defer my question to Amela Khan from Epic Times?
Sure, yes. Please.
Thank you, Mr.
Please.
President.
Thank you.
I would like to ask your opinion about what recently happened in Hong Kong, recent attack on press freedom in Hong Kong, and Jimmy Lai was arrested, his newsroom was raided. How will the U.S. respond to this?
Well, I think it's a terrible thing, but one thing that we have done, we gave tremendous incentives to Hong Kong because of freedom. We want freedom.
All right, I just want to highlight the organizations that are allowed to ask questions in this newsroom are increasingly conspiracy theory oriented publications. This was a question from the Epic Times, which has a history of spreading wild falsehoods and conspiracy theories, especially those related to the coronavirus.
Told them it's unacceptable, and we've been We've been doing that for a long time. They understand exactly how we feel, and big changes are being made. But with respect to Hong Kong, they get tremendous financial incentives so that they could do business and compete in the world. We've now withdrawn all of those incentives. It's going to be very hard for Hong Kong to compete. And I will tell you that the United States, and I say this from any standpoint you want to hear it, will end up making a lot more money because of it, because we lost a lot of business to Hong Kong. We made it very convenient for people to go there, for companies to go there. We've withdrawn all of that, and the United States will be a big beneficiary from an economic standpoint. But I hate to see what happened to Hong Kong, because freedom is a great thing. Thank you all very much. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay, so the President of the United States has ended his press conference, and so there's a lot of stuff to sum up, but I want to particularly hit two areas. One is this notion of blue state bailouts, and the other is the notion of voter fraud. So obviously, cities and states, especially blue states, are facing budget shortfalls because their regular streams of revenue have been cut off. States make their money through sales taxes, income taxes, and fees for doing things that people aren't doing. If you're canceling your wedding, you're not paying for your marriage license. So obviously, states are suffering from that. At the same time that states and cities in particular, are seeing a dramatic cut-off in revenue, they are having to spend more on emergency services because we are in the middle of a health crisis. So it is not shocking mismanagement that means that cities are suddenly seeing massive budget shortfalls. Cities that have been able to operate successfully for hundreds of years are suddenly facing massive budget shortfalls because of the facts of the coronavirus. Now, it is also true that states are seeking help from the federal government. Whose money are they asking for? Typically, blue states fund everyone else. New York contributes nearly $150 billion in taxes out of New Yorkers' pockets to the federal budget. That is roughly 9% of the total budget. The biggest blue states all contribute more to the federal government than they normally get back in federal services. Now they are just asking for a little bit of their own money back to deal with a crisis. Now, I believe that with the exception of Texas, every single red state takes more in services from the federal government than it contributes in taxes. From 2015 to 2018, New York paid approximately $116 billion more to the government than it received in federal spending. At that same time, Mitch McConnell's state of Kentucky received $148 billion more from the government than it contributed. So during that time, for every dollar a New Yorker paid in federal taxes, the federal government spent 91 cents on New Yorkers. But for every dollar a Kentuckian paid in federal taxes, the federal government spent $2.41 on that Kentuckian. Blue states have more people than red states. So, of course, they have higher expenses. And because of higher population density, blue states were among the first to be hard hit by the coronavirus, although now that has reversed itself somewhat because blue states enacted very tough lockdown measures, and for the most part, red states did not. The big exception there is California, which is a blue state, which had a very tough early lockdown and has unfortunately lost a lot of the ground that it made against the coronavirus. In the first round of payments that came out for money, the $150 billion for state and local governments was distributed evenly between the 50 states. So red states got more per capita than blue states, even though they were having less of the coronavirus. And Governor Cuomo highlighted that at that time, Wyoming effectively got $300,000 for every coronavirus patient, while New York got only $12,000. So we shouldn't be looking. It happens to be that blue states do more than their fair share to fund the government, and red states, with the exception of Texas, do less than their fair share. But that shouldn't matter, because we are all Americans and we are all in a crisis together. And the idea that Mitch McConnell and President Trump would suggest that blue states should be cut off, should be left to go bankrupt, is a disgusting thing to suggest. I remember very well how when New York was suffering, when New York and New Jersey were suffering after Hurricane Sandy, Texas Senator Ted Cruz fought to block payments for recovery in New York and New Jersey. No New York or New Jersey senator objected to Texas receiving hurricane payments. Americans should be there for each other in times of crisis, regardless of party. And I am not suggesting that red states should get less because they contribute less. The states should all get what they need in a crisis according to the severity of the crisis. I'll get back to voter fraud. So the president has falsely suggested that there are problems with widespread voter fraud. It is virtually non-existent. A comprehensive study found analyzing over 1 billion ballots cast from 2000 to 2014. Out of over 1 billion ballots cast, there were only 31 identifiable instances of fraud. And in terms of voting by mail, there are many respects in which committing fraud by voting by mail is harder than doing it in person. Oregon was the first state to vote by mail. Since it went to an all vote by mail process in 2000, it has mailed out more than 100 million ballots, and there have only been about a dozen proven cases of fraud. The most recent case of large-scale mail voter fraud was actually carried out by a Republican operative in North Carolina. But despite that, the risks of voter fraud are extremely, extremely low. President Trump falsely suggested that Democrats want to make it harder to vote. Democrats are across the board as wanting to make it easier to vote. It is Republicans who are pushing voter ID laws, which have been found in court to pose a disproportionate burden to elderly voters, minority voters, and low-income voters, who are the least likely people to have IDs. I also just want to get to the topic of the president said that states want to do too much locking down, that blue states want to do it for political reasons. Blue states don't want to do it for political reasons. The idea that local leaders would want to make their local communities suffer to somehow make the president look worse is a grossly cynical thing to suggest, but it is also ignorant of the fact that those governors and mayors all have to stand for re-election themselves, so even from a coldly political standpoint, it wouldn't make sense. Data shows that the majority of states that began to reopen prior to May 15th are the ones that are now facing the biggest surges in new coronavirus cases. For many states, the number of new infections is comparable to what it was reported in the spring. States that imposed restrictions and started reopening after more than well, I would read you this whole thing. The long and short of it are, the states that closed down sooner and stayed closed longer did a better job of getting this thing under control than the states that opened quickly. And it's also important to note that the 5 states that have seemed to have succeeded the most in flattening curves also issued directives to wear masks in public starting in April. So that is it from the President's briefing today. I am Alan Piper, NowThis senior politics producer. I had the support of multiple producers from our newsroom today, most particularly Shelby Vacalin and Zara Heder. Thank you for tuning in. Please take care of yourself. Take care of the people that you love. Take advantage of this time to make sure that the people you love know how much you love them. We are going to get through this thing together. For NowThis, I am Alan Piper. Thank you and good night.